Welcome back to the OIS podcast. In this episode, Dr. Sadri speaks with the legendary Bill Link about his path into ophthalmology, lessons learned along the way, and the current COVID-19 crisis. Let's listen in.
Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Hassan Sadri, board-certified ophthalmologist here in Newport Beach, California. I've had the great pleasure and honor of introducing our next guest, Dr. Link, who is just an unbelievable tour de force when it comes to medical devices and investments in ophthalmology. In small circles, I call him the Phil Jackson of ophthalmology. I've never shared that with him, but I'm glad to have him on. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing fine. Happy to be on the podcast with you.
We're happy to have you. A little bit about our listeners, not that anyone needs to know your background, but I always like to do a little background. Dr. Link was basically a founder. He's currently the managing partner of Flying L Partners, very effective group, also with Andy Corley and Dr. Lindstrom. And he's also the founder and managing director of Versant Ventures. Prior to that, he was CEO of Chiron Vision, which sold to BNL in 1997. We're just so excited to have you on board. How are you doing? How's the wife doing? How's the family doing during Corona?
Son, thanks for having me. And we're doing as well as we can. What a transitional time in our life, isn't it? The level of uncertainty and concern that we all have is still very high. But we're coming into a pattern now. We've been, 8 weeks or more into the crisis stage. And initially, the confusion and uncertainty was so immense that we didn't quite know what to do. And then step by step, we've made decisions, both at the personal and family level as well as professional level. And now there's more of a cadence and a pattern. So things are settling down. And I think we're accepting that we still have a lot of uncertainty.
Agreed. My practice, as to echo what you're saying, has gone through a transformation. I'd love to talk to you a little bit while we're on a topic. Get your opinion about how ophthalmology is in our practice is going to be affected. Obviously practicing social distancing and making sure the safety of patients and the staff and physicians are in place. What are your thoughts? What do you think the next few weeks, few months, maybe a few years look like for ophthalmology during this crisis?
Well, we are starting the recovery, aren't we? I'm hearing from colleagues and friends and seeing it in my businesses that I'm involved with that the ophthalmic practices and surgery is starting to re-engage and gain some traction. I was on a call earlier today where there's a prominent high-volume practice here in the United States that is already back to 80% of the pre-crisis volume. And so I think that's a leading indicator that we're on our way back. There will continue to be uncertainties, and I bet we'll have some setbacks, during the recovery period. But, the optimist in me is solid that what we do is important, for people to see better and see well. And that becomes, that is reemerging and will reemerge as a top priority for patients.
So we mentioned that, and I think you're absolutely right. It's funny because last week I did 18 cases, which is remarkable in this. I thought people would be afraid to come in. And you're right. People value their site. They've been waiting. And I think to your point also is there's a pent-up demand that we'll probably see in July, hopefully in August, a surge. Can I ask you, what are your thoughts on COVID-19 and how that impacts like startups? So you're obviously extremely involved in startups and are a master of them. What are your thoughts? What do you give advice to the CEOs that you're sit on boards with? What does that conversation look like?
Yeah, let me address that in two steps. One is, let me share my observations and perspective of how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted my current portfolio. I'm engaged in nearly 15 to 17 companies at various levels. Every company, every early stage private company that I'm involved in is impacted. The interesting part is that some are very substantially impacted with major, I call it a body blow, okay, major setback, have to replan, rethink everything. Many of my early stage private companies are modestly impacted. If they were commercial, major impact because the commercial activity dropped away and now hopefully and thankfully is beginning to reemerge. If the company was at the clinical stage of doing clinical trials and actively enrolling, they were impacted because the enrollment diminished, maybe stopped entirely, and now hopefully is beginning to reengage. If the portfolio company and the team was at the preclinical stage, at the development and in the research lab and so forth, they were materially less impacted, and so it's a full spectrum. And so with that as a natural observation of the relative impact based on the stage of the company and the project, then so an entrepreneur and a team needs to think carefully about what stage are they at and what will be the impact, and how do they manage prospectively and creatively with resilience. How do they manage the COVID-19 threat?
That's a very good some advice for those young entrepreneurs out there. That I hope you have pen and pencil ready, because this gentleman is giving out some pearls out here. You nailed it. I think it's leadership, and I think are they getting now? Do you feel like, how does that conversation look like? If you feel like you see a CEO making, I don't want to say the word mistake, but moving away from the reservation a little bit, do you nudge them along? How does that go? Or do you feel like you just kind of sit and observe and hoping that they come back on their own?
Well, it varies, doesn't it? If you have a really seasoned CEO that's been through a couple of cycles and been through the ups and downs that happens always as we build businesses, then there's probably less direct involvement from me and other board members about what to do and how to do it relative to responding to this rapid change. But if it's an earlier, less experienced, maybe even a first-time CEO, then probably there's more engagement. But even with the more seasoned leaders, they instinctively and naturally bring in everybody to help think through. Number one, to make sure everybody's aware. The board, the team, the customers, and so forth is aware of the situation. Identify the areas that are at risk. Develop a plan that will address the risk. Execute the plan. And so that happens in some of the companies that I'm involved in more comprehensively by the leadership team of the company. And in some cases, there's more direct engagement by me and or other board members to roll up our sleeves and help, kind of no kidding. And one of the things that is entirely real in our lives, both at a personal and professional level, is we have to develop skills and emotional maturity on how to deal with challenge. We can't panic, but we also can't look the other direction. We have to really be critical and insightful and seek the honest truth of how big's the impact and what should we do. One of my companies that is at the commercial stage is a company named CorneaGen that's in the corneal therapy business. We had a major impact. Monty Montoya, the CEO, and the board and the senior team had to roll up our sleeves and immediately do a major downsizing in the company. We downsized the company by 45% in a 2-week period. That's aggressive, assertive, decisive, hard action to take.
Yes, I'm very familiar with Monty and CorneaGen, and let's talk about that in the next few weeks, few months, because this is intriguing to me and our audience. Do you feel like this is going to be a temporary thing and therefore we are going to be back on? So you mentioned cornea gen going down by 45%. Do you feel like the by the volume coming back, the cornea is being used, et cetera, and the corneal tissue variety is needed? Are you optimistic in the sense that we're gonna see an uptick in and therefore coming back of the market, or do you feel like this is a slow, steady growth return to
Yeah,
baseline?
I'm highly confident that if we have meaningful therapies, such as Cornea Gen does, and many of our other companies, if we have meaningful therapies that really help the surgeon, the practitioner, and the patient, if it's better for them, then there will be a strong, solid recovery. What I'm uncertain about is the rate at which the recovery will happen. There are various points of view, okay, as to how rapidly in the ophthalmic sector, how rapidly the patient surgical volumes and visit volumes are going to come back. But I tend to be a bit of an optimist on these things. And my sense is that as we are in the fourth quarter and are exiting 2020, that we're going to be 90% back from a volume standpoint. And I think 2021 could be, if we don't have another massive setback on the COVID-19 threat, that I think 2021 could be a solid, quote unquote, positive, typical year, Hassan. So that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's spot on. That's I share that with you. I'm an eternal optimist as well. Just on a micro level, I've seen some uptick in patients coming in, and they trust the doctor as long as there's everything's been in place. I feel like the patients really, to your point earlier, need care and they want to get care. I struggle with my colleagues that are like pure aesthetic surgery. That might be a little different for them. Let's talk about a little bit about the companies, because I've talked privately many times, and I feel like I would love to spend more time understanding. There's very few people that have your perspective. Tell me, when your first career started, how did you shift into ophthalmology? What was that event like?
Well, again, back in the day, many decades ago, I was educationally trained as an engineer. And I went to Purdue University in the Midwest, grew up in the state of Indiana, so it was an in-state top-tier school, studying mechanical engineering, got my master's, or my bachelor's, master's, and my PhD, but somehow I got interested in medicine, Hassan. I don't know why, but it was so interesting to think about using engineering skills to solve medical problems. So to learn more about medicine, since Purdue didn't have a medical school, they had a vet school. I also am trained as a veterinarian. So that dual training of primarily being an engineer, but also being knowledgeable on the medical side, helped me become a biomedical engineer before it was even a formed profession. My first job as I graduated from Purdue was in Indianapolis at the Indiana University School of Medicine, Department of Surgery. So I was a non-physician in that medical environment. So I ran the research laboratory, the animal research laboratory, as an assistant professor, and we did studies, and I trained the surgical residents how to do animal surgery, etc. To earn money, I did some research projects for industry. And I didn't know what I was accomplishing there, but I was building relationships with industry. Then I got actively recruited after 3 years at the university to join medical device company, American Hospital Supply Corporation in Southern California. And the first day on the job, I was supposed to be the technical guy on a medical or on a business development team to evaluate new technologies and acquisitions and so forth. The first day on the job, the big boss at the end of the table had a list of topics that he was talking with his team about. And he got about an hour into the meeting, and he came across this his next topic, which was an intraocular lens. And he had to say it like that because he didn't know what it was. And someone had mentioned that there was a type of lens that could be put in the eye to help people see better. And he asked his team, do any of you know about this intraocular lens? He was reading it. And it was dead quiet. And I'm the kid. I'm on the job for 6 hours by now, and I'm all these important, accomplished people around me, and about 30 seconds of silence, and I just couldn't stand it. And I just said, well, Mr. Peary, I don't know about the lens per se, but I know an ophthalmologist, so I can call him and learn about the lens. And he looked at me and he said, okay, he was trying to remember my name. He said, okay, Link, you call your friend and come back next week and tell us about these intraocular lenses. That started my career in ophthalmology.
That's fascinating. Who was the ophthalmologist? Were you buddies with him? You just called him up and said,
well, the irony was that he was a retina guy back in Indianapolis. Okay. And I called this friend who had been a fellow while I was an assistant, professor. We were the same age and all. And I said to him, I've been asked to learn about intraocular lenses. And he said, Bill, stay away from those things. He's a retina guy in the 70s, right? Stay away from those things. Every time I see an intraocular lens, it's kind of falling back in the back of the eye, and I've got to extract it and, take all the vitreous out. And he said, whatever you do, don't get involved with IOLs.
Wow.
And I said, well, I have to learn more. So I said, who do you know that implants lenses? And he gave me a couple of names.
Okay.
Norm Jaffe, down in Florida.
Yeah.
And several. And so that week I traveled to Oklahoma City, watched Jim Little do surgery. I traveled to Florida. Henry Clayman did the surgery. I traveled to New York and watched surgery there. And so I came back to the West Coast a week after that meeting when the boss's boss had said somebody needs to learn about these lenses. I had visited 5 surgeons and witnessed 35 surgeries. So I was very comfortable in surgery, right, with my background. Mm-hmm. And so I loved being in the operating room with the surgeons, learning and listening and so forth. And so I put together, a presentation in the old-fashioned way when we used transparencies. It was before PowerPoint by a couple decades. Uh-huh. And I taught, the senior team there at American Hospital about intraocular lenses. And within a year, we had started our own IOL business, and that became AMO. And Mr. Peary asked me to be the general manager. Well, wow. I didn't even know what a general manager was. And I said, really? What's that? He said, no, you're the boss. I said, oh, okay.
Wow. How old were you when he asked you to be GM?
Let's see, 29.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a good conversation with your wife, huh? When you went back home, you're like, hey.
Yeah. I think I got a promotion, but I'm not sure.
Marcia's like, we're going to dinner. That's wonderful. That's awesome. What a great story. So a couple of things for you guys listening. One is when opportunity knocks, you may not have all the answers. You just jump and you go get the answers, right? So action. Notice he said he went and he over-delivered, right? And I think that's pretty critical. So sometimes we tend to hesitate. Analysis is paralysis, right? Bill, do you agree with that? What if you had said, I don't know about it, let me go read up on it,
Yeah.
And,
Or what if I had just sat quietly? I didn't need to say anything, did I? Right?
Yes.
I'm the new kid on the block. And I just learned to tie a tie. I had to wear a tie and, and all of that back in that era. But it's just something, gave me the drive or the confidence to say, well, I don't know, but I'll find out.
It's entirely correct.
How cool is that? Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, like if you think about the other learning lesson you're teaching there is go get it, because you could have easily talked yourself out of saying, hey, I don't know anything. I just joined this company. I don't want to, piss anybody off by talking out of line, kind of a thing. A lot of that we can talk ourselves out. Would you agree with that?
I agree totally. Yeah.
Okay, so let's flash forward. So now you're jumping into intraocular lenses. I love it. And and then so now ophthalmology is your thing. So now you're started, and you're what we all know eventually became AMO, which was amazing, and they're still around to this day, part of Johnson and Johnson. How did that then transition into venture capital? Tell me about that. Like, because you're a GM now, you're learning about IOLs. Did you take on multiple projects? Did you say to yourself, "This is fascinating. I'm going to branch out"? What was that conversation like with you, and how did that become reality?
Yeah, a couple of stages. First of all, building a business when you've never done it before is wild. And so you try things, you ask people, and so forth. And so the learning, I was 10 years with American Hospital Supply building AMO. And so I went from not knowing how to spell ophthalmology with that extra H in it to really being immersed in it, honestly immersed in it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And having, at a very important time, right, when IOLs and phacoemulsification were just emerging as important technologies and so forth. YAG laser, we developed the YAG laser. What's that? How do you do it? Oh, you need to open up the capsule. So we were there doing things early, and so I think one thing I learned about myself during that period was I'm willing to try things. When in doubt, try it. And that kind of leaning forward personality or trait, maybe a trait's a better word, really began to serve me. The other thing that served me well was that when we made mistakes, we identified them, apologized that was wrong, that didn't work, let's try it this way. And so that you've heard me say the iterative part of innovation is real. Yeah. You try it, it's not quite perfect, take your learning, step back, try it another direction. So that iterative process I was learning in real time, in the real world, Isan, during the AMO era. Then what happened was the American Hospital got acquired, okay, by Baxter. My boss, that had learned how to spell intraocular lenses, Will Peary, transitioned out. So the team, the executive team that I was loyal to left, okay. I then decided to try to build my own business. And so Marcia and I started Chiron Vision in our home. So I left AMO. AMO was sold to Allergan and became Allergan Medical Optics, then Advanced Medical Optics as a public company, Abbott, and now J&J, as you referenced earlier. And so then I did my own startup, and I'd never done that before. I had started a company within a corporate structure where the funding was available and resources were available if you could convince people that this was a good place to invest. But now I had to learn how to raise money. I had to build a team from scratch and so forth. So in the private sector, we built Chiron Vision, which was sold. It took 12 years, and that was sold to Bausch and Lomb. Okay, and then I was ready to not build another company or not run another company. And so career transition-wise, as we were finishing with Chiron Vision, I was ready to do something different. I was in my early 50s. I think I was 51 or 52 when we sold Chiron Vision to Bausch and Lomb. And that's when I transitioned into venture, not quite knowing what it was, but making investments one company at a time, and then not running the company but coaching it. Being the coach versus the player. So that was a bit of that transition.
That's fascinating. So you were in a company for 12 years, it gets sold, and then you say, okay, time to take a step back and start to take these lessons potentially and maybe kind of be a coach and not necessarily be if, for lack of better terms, married to one company again, because we've seen it both ways, right? We've seen a CEO go from one company to another, which is great. And then what's fascinating about you, I think what's really intriguing is that you said, okay, now we're going to go and spread this wisdom to multiple companies, and that's what, for me, it's personally very intriguing about you specifically because there's very few of you. And so you're but you knew that. So, and I'm going to ask you about that. So now you're a VC, you're like basically taught yourself how to create a company. And we didn't, by the way, guys, we didn't really talk about how you raised money. Was it hard? Was it easy? Tell us through that real quick. You're with Marcia at the kitchen table. You're like, honey, we're doing an IOL company. Do you just go to friends and family? Then do you just go? We didn't really talk about it. How was that real quick for our audience?
Yeah. So as we were starting Chiron Vision, Marcia and I put a small amount of money in to form the entity, and I struck a licensing agreement with Chiron Corporation to get some of their technology. And then I wanted to raise between 250 and $500,000, 250,000, $500,000. Didn't quite know how to do it, but I had thankfully, a network of strong relationships with ophthalmologists and business colleagues. And so we raised money, $50,000 at a time. And so I went to various physicians that many of whom you would know, and they invested with me. Okay, so we got that small amount of initial capital, one investor at a time, and then we launched the project. And Chiron Corporation liked what we were doing, and so they became a corporate partner and an investor. So Chiron began to supply the capital to keep advancing the program. And then after a few years, Chiron Corporation integrated Chiron Vision into Chiron Corp as a wholly owned subsidiary. And from that point on, the full capitalization was from Chiron Corporation to build the business.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So, Bill, if you don't mind, I want to go back for the audience. So notice what he did was he de-risked some of it. He went out. It was very risky. No track record. Young guy, but had a lot of connections. Believed in himself. Really invested in himself. I know a couple of those moments too, where you got to ask for friends for checks, and that, those are. I'm right there with you. So, and no track record. And those guys who believe in you, I think, are their friends for life. Aren't they special to you?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just kind of believed in you, and you had a good record, but you hadn't done it on your own. But they give their hard-earned dollars to you. That's fascinating. I love that story. That's great. Okay, so I want to, for our audience, to really talk about now what was all the companies. You're going to ask you this. It's hard to see who your favorite kid is. We're not going to ask you that. But what's been the most pleasant experience out of all the companies that you've had to nurture and take through the development process? What would you say if you had to pick one? And I know it's hard to do, but give us one or two companies that you say these are my favorite ones, and why.
Glaukos. Glaukos is high on my list for all the reasons. But what I appreciate, respect, and learned from Glaukos is to stay with it. And you've probably heard me use this phrase, near-death experiences.
Yep.
The chance of us with a raw early startup going on a path when there are not setbacks or deviations, the chance of that is really, really low. With Glaukos, it was this kind of crazy idea to develop a tiny little implant to help drain aqueous from the anterior chamber into the Schlemm's canal. And, and it was intriguing enough that, it was one of my earliest investments for after we formed Versant Ventures. And we worked at it, and it started to work physiologically, but we were running out of money. We were having trouble raising capital. We finally were barely able to do that. We had to stay below the radar screen. MIGS was not even a phrase at the time. There wasn't a word that described what we were trying to do. And so we went through several iterations at Glaukos, but we believed. And we stayed, stayed committed. And luckily we had enough strong team members and supporters around the board room relative to investors that we got through the tough times. And then finally, we got FDA approval after it had been very materially delayed. Took us 5 years longer than I had forecast to get FDA approval. But then, and that was in 2012, we got FDA approval as an example. And then, we had to build the market, and it was brand new and tough to do it, but with a great team and a great technology, you can do it. And now everybody around, I believe, and I'm entirely biased in this regard, sees Glaukos as just a wonderful success. Well, I lived it day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, and I know how tough it was and how close we came to not succeeding. And so I love that, when we made it, okay, and it wasn't easy. So Glaukos would be high on my list. And I've got other examples, Intralays and and other, very substantial companies. One of the outliers for me was LensX. Ron Kurtz came to me and had this, idea about using femto laser for cataract surgery. And I said, oh, gee, really? And so we've started to think about it. We laid out a plan. We put some money in. He didn't spend all the money. We everything went perfectly, and we sold it to Alcon before I expected. So, so I think one project in my career has gone better than I thought. So,
One. Wow.
Yeah. So those are a couple of examples of many teams and companies that I'm privileged and delighted to have been involved with that created value, delivered benefits to the patient, benefits to the surgeon, and corporate benefits to the investors. So you need to check all of those boxes to have it be a success.
Super intriguing because I have a funny backstory on the Glaukos. Rick Hill was my mentor when I was doing my fellowship. Mm-hmm. And so we this is 2000, early 2003, 2004. So as you know, and I had heard your name because you had mentioned it to me, and you know exactly how he is. We were working on the design in the parking lot of the university, and I got my bug by having those conversations with him. That was how I got sort of kind of like what you were saying, the boardroom. That was my sort of entree. I heard your name, but never met you until years later. But that's so fascinating to hear that, for those guys listening, he had to go through literally, near-death experiences. And there's a concept called stick-to-itiveness. So, and that's really intriguing and just wonderful. When you were doing that, when you were involved with Glaukos and you were managing and troubleshooting and raising funds, and now you're 5 years delayed, were you doing other projects? And if so, how did you manage your time and energy and focus?
Yeah, so good question. Candidly, in my business, my profession, you have a portfolio, right? And so you have multiple companies that you are engaged with and quote unquote responsible for from the investor side. Okay, so with Versant Ventures and Flying L Partners and Brentwood, et cetera, one of us as an investor is on point with, a company. And so I would have my portfolio. And one thing that's so real is, let's say you have 8 or 10 companies that you are responsible for from the VC side. Okay, you're probably on the board and so forth. Part of the reality in my life has been that, and I'll just use the number 10. Let's say there are 10 companies that I'm engaged with and involving, and responsible for and helping, if you will. 2 or 3 of the companies are on autopilot. Things are clicking, it's going great. 3 or 4 or 5 of the companies are doing pretty well, iterating, it's okay. Largely, things are going well. And 2 or 3 of the companies are in a crisis. And so there's this, or in a high work, and not a crisis, in a high work period. For example, when we need to raise money, my workload and engagement goes up with a company because I have to play, a pretty substantial role as we go out and ask people for more money and help the team and convey confidence both to the team, but also a new investor that this is a good investment. And so when you manage bandwidth here, fingers crossed that you don't have too many of your companies in the portfolio in the high work stage, the high intensity stage. Now let's fast forward to COVID-19. What do you think it's been like the last 8 weeks?
Nail biter.
Every company, every project is in a high intensity mode, isn't it?
Yes.
And so I bet you have been as busy as you've ever been, haven't you?
Yes.
I've been as busy as I've ever been, in the last while here, just having to respond, figure out, support, challenge, company by company, team by team.
Have you ever had a situation like this in the past in your career where all the companies are stressed out?
No, it's, fortunately, no. And my forecast is honest. I'm never going to experience this again in my life. So, this is a one-time deal.
Thank God, right?
Yeah. But also, just let me ramble just a moment. You think about what we're learning, okay? How we have had to reprioritize day by day, hour by hour, week by week, right? And guess what? We probably would be having this conversation from Boston or someplace, right? We'd be off at ASCRS, or we'd be off at, another meeting, etc. But we're sequestered, and we're having to adapt how to communicate, how to engage, how to accomplish differently. And I think, not to jump ahead, but if you think about forward, let's put ourselves out 1 year, 3 years. What's going to be different given the challenge and learnings that have happened during this crisis? There's going to be a moderate amount different in your life, in my life, in our business, both as a practitioner, as a surgeon, as an investor, as a business person. And now trying to figure that out. Where's the opportunity and where's the threat, and what's going to be different in the future?
So while we're on that, do you have any preliminary thoughts on that? Like the unmet need or technologies that you think, gosh, I think that this would be something that I would love to see happen, given your vast experience. What would be something that you think that you're like, this is an unmet need that I would like?
Yeah, a couple of, not as direct able to answer that specific question, but broadly, we're going to be forever more virtual than we were before the crisis. Correct?
I agreed 100%.
Yeah. So at the practice level, at the business level, at the family level, we are going to be more effective in a virtual engagement than we were previously. Thankfully, our technology in our world is ready and able to facilitate and support that process. Okay. In the medical field, and specifically in ophthalmology, telemedicine, off the charts. Luckily, we had emerging telemedicine capabilities and so forth. They were hardly ever paid for. Now they're being reimbursed. So it's more efficient for the patient, more efficient for the provider, and and rewarding to the developer and supplier as well. So that's an example of a sector broadly in healthcare, but and including specifically in ophthalmology, that will be different. I think virtual training and instruction is going to be different. I'm wondering whether the typical sales personnel engagement directly with the customer on site will ever return, right?
Absolutely.
And so those
Big
are the
question
kind of
mark.
things. I have there's a colleague of mine in the venture field, very very insightful and successful. In talking with him 2 weeks ago, he said that their venture firm has made a decision. They're not going to invest in a healthcare company that requires salespeople.
Wow.
Wow, that's
Wow.
different. Think about that.
Just because of the shift, just because
Yes.
there's a pivot. I see.
Yeah. And if someone had said that to me 9 months ago, I'd have said, "Well, gee, that's too bad that they're off base and thinking poorly." But now, given the impact and the uncertainty and the required change that we've had, it may be a right thing to anticipate that.
And then, so let's talk about the meetings. I mean, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about these meetings basically becoming virtualized. Do you feel like there's going to be an era where they're going to be 80% virtual and then maybe 20% networking, because that human interaction is critical in what we do and how things get done? Or do you envision something else when you're sort of attending these meetings, the future of ophthalmology meetings in general?
Yeah.
How do you see that changing?
First of all, I really don't know. Okay, it's in other words, we're in this state of uncertainty and pending change, and so I'm really pretty uncertain where we're going to land, Hassan, on that. But what we know is that they'll be much more versatile and less direct personal physical engagement, right? We know that. But I don't have a good perspective, or I don't have a forecast yet of what that balance is going to be. It might be 50-50, or it's 60% virtual and 40% direct engagement. And one of the things I think about is there was already some trending within on the society side of ophthalmology for smaller meetings, and I love that as well because they're complementary. So the ACOS organization that we formed years ago, has modest size meetings, 100 to 200 attendees, and it's a blend of docs and non-physicians. And so it fits better with it's aligned with my view of how innovation happens. And the OIS team has heard this from me so often, is that you need physicians and the non-physicians to engage for innovation to happen, and you need money, and you need the strategic leaders. So those four segments are so required. And so I think the smaller meetings will thrive going forward. Virtual engagement and virtual meetings will thrive. And what I'm a little unsure about is how the large leading organizations such as ASCRS and Academy and ESCRS and others, how they will need to adapt. And I bet they're scrambling right now to try to anticipate and lead and think forward on that.
I know we've taken a lot of your time, and I know you have other things you got to do. Let me ask you one last question. So you've won 12 rings, Phil Jackson. Any thoughts of retirement next 5 years, 10 years? Not that we would lose you. We don't want to lose you, but what are your thoughts? Is Marcia telling you, okay, it's enough is enough, or this COVID thing adding to that, or where are you at with that?
I can't imagine retirement. I think balancing our life is the challenge, right? And in the era that we're in now, largely retirement is obsolete. It's transition from one activity to another, one level of engagement and commitment to another, that type of thing. And so, and I'm so fortunate that I can choose which investments I want to be involved in, which teams I'd like to engage with, which technologies and so forth. And so where I must keep trying to balance my life is to not overcommit to the number of professional engagements I have, so that I honestly have adequate balance for things I want to do that nourish me, but also engagement with Marcia and our family and friends. And so that balance may change over time, but not only related to the COVID-19 perturbation here, but one of the things that I'm feeling good about for me personally is that I'm as busy as I've ever been, and I think nearly as happy as I've ever been.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hopefully we could, when things open a little bit, we can take our masks off and go golfing again.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Well, I have a ton more questions to ask you, but I'm respectful of you and your time. I just wish you and Marcia and the whole family safe and happiness this year coming up. So congratulations on all your accomplishments.
Well, thanks so much. And again, thanks for those nice words and good wishes. And I wish you and your family and all the others around you health and happiness.
Thanks, Bill.
We hope you took away some valuable insights from this episode. Don't forget to join Bill for the virtual OIS Israel event taking place on June 18th. Sign up for free as an OIS podcast subscriber at ois.net. Join us next week when we introduce the new OIS Retina podcast host, Dr. Firas Rahal.